Officer Paul's gun-on black driver didn't know who she was. On a quiet stretch of highway outside Houston, an officer drew his weapon on an unarmed black woman and had absolutely no idea he was about to destroy his own career. "Get your hands where I can see them now, or I will end this." The cold steel of his service weapon caught the afternoon sun as he aimed it directly at her head through the driver's side window. Dr. Renee Marshall felt her blood freeze. Her surgeon's hands, the same hands that had saved 3 lives that morning, trembled as she raised them slowly toward the roof of her car. For the first time in 40 years, she genuinely believed she might die. Officer Dean Hutchins stood with his feet planted wide, weapon drawn, with the casual confidence of a man who had done this before and gotten away with it every single time. His lip curled into a sneer that said he was enjoying this. But Officer Hutchins had just made the catastrophic mistake of pulling a gun on a woman whose husband was watching everything unfold in real time from FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. The afternoon of October 3rd had started with triumph. Dr. Renee Marshall, chief of trauma surgery at Houston Methodist Hospital, had performed back-to-back emergency surgeries since 5 a.m. A 17-year-old gunshot victim. A construction worker with a collapsed lung. A grandmother whose heart had stopped twice on the table. All 3 were going to live. Renee had saved them just like she'd saved hundreds of others over her 22-year career. At 3:47 p.m., exhausted but fulfilled, she'd finally left the hospital. Her silver Lexus SUV pulled onto Interstate 10, heading toward the suburb of Katy where she and her husband James had built their dream home 15 years ago. James. Deputy Director James Marshall of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They'd met 25 years ago when Renee was a surgical resident and James was a young agent working a case at her hospital. He'd been shot in the line of duty, nothing serious, just a graze, but Renee had been the one to stitch him up. He'd asked for her number while she was still holding the suture needle. She'd said no. He'd come back the next day with flowers. She'd said no again. He'd come back every day for 2 weeks. Finally, she'd said yes. Now, at 52 years old, Renee Marshall was one of the most respected trauma surgeons in Texas, married to one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the country, mother to 2 grown children, and grandmother to a beautiful 3-year-old girl named Zoe. She had everything. And in approximately 7 minutes, a man with a badge and a gun would try to take it all away. The blue lights appeared without warning. Renee checked her speedometer. 63 in a 65 zone. She looked in her rearview mirror. A Harris County Sheriff's cruiser, closing fast. Her brow furrowed. She signaled, moved to the shoulder, and brought her Lexus to a gentle stop. Gravel crunched beneath her tires as the cruiser pulled in behind her. Out of habit, she pressed a button on her dashboard. The car's integrated security system, a custom installation James had insisted on after threats against FBI officials' families had increased, activated silently. 4 high-definition cameras began recording from every angle. The audio captured everything within 30 feet. And, though Renee didn't know it would matter, the system began live streaming to a secure server that James could access from anywhere in the world. Renee turned off her engine. She placed her hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. She waited. 20 seconds passed. 30. A full minute. The officer didn't approach. Through her side mirror, Renee could see him sitting in his cruiser, apparently talking on his radio. His body language was aggressive, she could tell even from this distance. He kept gesturing toward her vehicle. Finally, after nearly 3 minutes, the cruiser door opened. Officer Dean Hutchins was 44 years old, 18 years on the force, and absolutely convinced that this traffic stop was going to be entertaining. A black woman in a $90,000 Lexus SUV with a temporary tag? In his experience, that meant one of 2 things, drugs or a stolen vehicle. Either way, it meant opportunity. Opportunity for an arrest. Opportunity for asset forfeiture. Opportunity to remind certain people that they didn't belong in certain neighborhoods, driving certain cars. He approached the driver's side slowly, his hand already resting on the grip of his service weapon. When he reached the window, he didn't introduce himself. He didn't explain why he'd made the stop. He simply barked, "License and registration. Now." Renee nodded slowly. "Good afternoon, officer. My license is in my purse on the passenger seat. My registration is in the glove compartment." May I reach for them? Hutchins stared at her through his mirrored sunglasses. I'll decide what you can reach for. I understand, officer. I'm just trying to. Shut up. Did I ask you a question? Renee fell silent. In 22 years of emergency medicine, she'd learned to stay calm in chaos. She'd had patients' code on the table while blood sprayed across her scrubs. She'd delivered death notifications to wailing families. She'd made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. But this was different. This wasn't a sterile operating room where she was in control. This was the side of a highway where a man with a gun was looking at her like she was already guilty of something. License and registration, Hutchins repeated. Don't make me ask again. May I reach into my purse? Move slow. Renee's hand moved glacially toward the passenger seat. She pulled her wallet from her purse, extracted her driver's license, and held it toward the window. Hutchins snatched it without looking. Registration. It's in the glove compartment. May I? Open it. Slow. Renee leaned toward the passenger side and pressed the glove compartment button. Inside was the vehicle registration, the insurance card, and nothing else. But before she could reach for it, Hutchins's voice turned sharp. What's that? What's what? That right there. What is that? Renee looked at the glove compartment. There was nothing unusual. Just papers. Officer, those are my vehicle documents. That's all. It looks like you're reaching for something. I'm reaching for my registration. You asked me to. Get your hands up. Now. But here's the part that changed everything. The weapon came out in one fluid motion. Officer Dean Hutchins drew his service pistol and aimed it directly at Renee's head through the driver's side window. Hands where I can see them. Don't move. Renee's heart stopped. Literally stopped or felt like it. Her surgeon's mind, trained to remain analytical under pressure, registered everything. The weapon was a Glock 19, 9mm, standard issue. His finger was on the trigger, not on the frame, a violation of basic firearm safety. His stance was aggressive, weight forward, like he was preparing to fire. There was no reason for any of this. She had done nothing. Nothing. Officer, please, her voice came out as a whisper. I'm cooperating. I'm not a threat. Please put the gun down. I said don't move. Renee froze completely. Her hands were already raised, palms open, fingers spread. I'm not moving. I'm not moving. Step out of the vehicle. Slowly. Officer, can you please tell me what this is about? I'm a doctor. I don't care what you are. Get out of the car now. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have argued? Would you have demanded answers? Or would you have done exactly what she did: comply first, survive first, fight later? Renee opened the door slowly, keeping her hands visible. She stepped out onto the gravel shoulder, the afternoon sun beating down on her surgical scrubs, still wearing them from the hospital. A stethoscope hung from her neck. Her hospital ID badge was clipped to her chest. Dr. Renee Marshall, Chief of Trauma Surgery, Houston Methodist Hospital. The ID was right there. Anyone with functioning eyes could see it. But Officer Hutchins didn't look. He didn't care. Turn around. Hands on the vehicle. Renee turned. Placed her palms flat against the warm metal of her Lexus. And then, with the gun still pointed at her back, Officer Hutchins began to speak. You people think you can drive whatever you want, go wherever you want. But I know how the game works. Nice car like this? Temporary tag? Let me guess, your boyfriend bought it for you. Or maybe you stole it. Either way, I'm gonna find out what you're really up to. Renee's jaw tightened. You people. There it was. The truth behind the traffic stop. The truth behind the drawn weapon. The truth behind all of it. Officer, she said carefully, this vehicle is registered in my name. My registration is in the glove compartment. I purchased this car 3 weeks ago from Park Place Lexus. I am a physician at Houston Methodist Hospital. I have committed no crime. Hutchins laughed. Actually laughed. A doctor. Right. Let me guess, you also a lawyer? Maybe an astronaut too. He holstered his weapon but didn't apologize for drawing it. Instead, he spun her around roughly and began patting down her scrubs, running his hands along her sides, her hips, her legs. There was nothing professional about it. Nothing appropriate. It was designed to humiliate. And as he searched her, cars continued to pass on I-10. Some slowed to look. Some kept going. A few pulled out phones. Renee stood there, a 52-year-old black woman who had saved 3 lives that morning, being groped on the side of a highway by a man who had decided her skin color made her a criminal. But this was only the beginning. Because while Officer Hutchins was busy trying to justify his abuse, something was happening 1,400 miles away in Washington, D.C. And it was about to change everything. James Marshall was in his office at FBI headquarters when the alert came through. His secure tablet linked to Renee's vehicle security system began flashing red. Live stream active, Vehicle 1, threat detected. James frowned. Renee usually texted him when she left the hospital. He hadn't heard from her today. He tapped the notification. What he saw made his blood run cold. The live feed showed Renee's Lexus pulled over on the side of a highway. A Harris County Sheriff's cruiser was behind her, lights flashing. And his wife, Renee, was standing outside her car with her hands on the vehicle while an officer searched her. James watched for exactly 4 seconds. Then he started making calls. Back on the highway, Officer Hutchins had finished his search. He'd found nothing. Because there was nothing to find. "All right," he said, stepping back. "Sit on the curb." "The curb?" Did I stutter? "Sit. On. The. Curb." Renee looked at the ground. It was dirty, covered in road grime and debris. Her surgical scrubs, which she would need for tomorrow's early shift, would be ruined. But she Saturday. Because what choice did she have? Hutchins walked back to his cruiser with her license, leaving her sitting in the dirt like a suspect in a crime that didn't exist. 5 minutes passed. 10. Other cars continued to stream by. A few people had definitely recorded footage on their phones. Whether any of them would come forward later, Renee didn't know. She thought about her children. Marcus, 28, was an architect in Chicago. Brilliant, driven, successful. Jasmine, 24, was finishing her residency at Johns Hopkins. Following in her mother's footsteps. Both of them had received the talk as teenagers. The talk about what to do if they were ever stopped by police. Keep your hands visible. Don't argue. Say sir and no, sir. Survive the encounter. Fight later with lawyers, with the system, with everything you have. But survive first. Renee had given that talk. And now she was living it. Hutchins returned after 15 minutes. His face was troubled. He'd run her plates. The vehicle was registered to Dr. Renee E. Marshall at an address in Katy, Texas. He'd run her license. Clean driving record. No warrants. No flags. He'd even run her name through the system. And that's when things got complicated. Because her name had come back with a notation. Spouse of federal law enforcement official, notify supervisor before proceeding. Hutchins had ignored the notation. He'd ignored it because he didn't believe it. A black woman married to a federal official? Probably just some fake entry, some scam, some way people got their names flagged to avoid consequences. He wasn't going to fall for it. "All right," he said, standing over her. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to search your vehicle. You're going to sit there and keep your mouth shut. And if I find anything at all, you're going to jail. Understood?" Renee looked up at him. "Officer, you have no probable cause to search my vehicle. I have committed no traffic violation. I have presented valid identification and registration. Under the 4th Amendment." "The 4th Amendment?" Hutchins laughed. "Lady, this isn't a courtroom. This is my highway. And I'll tell you what amendments apply." He walked toward her Lexus. And that's when Renee said the words that would seal his fate. "Officer Hutchins, everything that's happening right now is being recorded by my vehicle's security system. The footage is being uploaded to a secure server in real time. Whatever you do next will be preserved forever." Hutchins stopped. Turned. "What did you say?" "I said you're being recorded. Every word." Every action. Everything you've done since you approached my car is already uploaded and cannot be deleted. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across Hutchins's face. Fear? Doubt? It vanished almost instantly. Recording me? He walked back toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel. That's cute. You know what? I'm going to impound your vehicle for suspected criminal activity. And when we get it back to the lot, we'll find that recording equipment you're talking about. And then I'll add illegal surveillance to your charges. If only he knew who he was talking to. # twist number 1, 40% mark. Renee's phone buzzed in her pocket. Hutchins heard it. What's that? My phone. Give it to me. Officer, I have a right to. Give it to me. Renee slowly reached into her pocket and handed over her phone. Hutchins looked at the screen. The notification read, "Incoming call, James Marshall, FBI Deputy Director." Hutchins stared at it. His face went pale. "This is a joke," he said. "You programmed this. You." The phone began ringing. The caller ID remained unchanged. James Marshall, FBI Deputy Director. "Answer it," Renee said quietly. "Go ahead. Answer it." Hutchins's hand trembled slightly as he swiped to answer. "Hello." The voice on the other end was calm, cold, and absolutely commanding. "This is Deputy Director James Marshall of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am speaking to you from FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. You are currently detaining my wife, Dr. Renee Marshall, on Interstate 10 outside Houston. I have been watching your conduct via live stream for the past 16 minutes. Hutchins couldn't speak. "I have already contacted the Harris County Sheriff's Department and spoken with your watch commander. I have also dispatched FBI agents from the Houston field office to your current location. They should arrive in approximately 12 minutes. Sir, You drew your weapon on an unarmed woman without justification. You conducted an illegal search of her person. You denied her basic constitutional rights. And you did all of this while being recorded by 4 high-definition cameras that have captured every word you've spoken." Silence. "You have exactly 2 options, Officer Hutchins. You can release my wife immediately, return her documents, and wait for the FBI agents to arrive, at which point you will be taken into custody for questioning. Or you can attempt to flee, obstruct, or destroy evidence, at which point you will face federal charges in addition to state charges." Hutchins's hand was shaking now. Which will it be? And just when things seemed like they might de-escalate, they didn't. Because Officer Dean Hutchins was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. He was a man who had spent 18 years bullying people, abusing his authority, and never not once facing any consequences. And he wasn't about to start now. He ended the call, dropped Renee's phone on the ground, and said 4 words that would destroy him. "That changes nothing. Get up." Renee stared at him. "Officer Hutchins, you just spoke with the Deputy Director of the FBI. He told you that agents are on their way. Whatever you're thinking about doing right now. I said get up." He grabbed her arm hard and yanked her to her feet. "You think I'm scared of your husband? You think some desk jockey in Washington is going to tell me how to do my job? He's not a desk jockey. He's nobody out here. Out here, I'm the law. Out here, I decide what happens." He began dragging her toward his cruiser. "What are you doing?" "Taking you in. Obstruction of justice. Resisting arrest. Threatening an officer. I haven't done any of those things. Your word against mine. And guess whose word a judge is going to believe?" Would you have stayed quiet in her position? For a moment, Renee considered fighting back. Physically fighting back. She was a trauma surgeon. She knew anatomy better than anyone. She knew exactly where to strike, how to disable, how to escape. But she also knew that fighting a police officer, even one who was clearly breaking the law, could get her killed. And she had grandchildren to think about. She had Zoe. So Renee did something that went against every instinct in her body. She went limp. Complete dead weight. It was a protest tactic she'd learned about in medical school when treating civil rights activists. If you couldn't fight, You could refuse to cooperate. Stand up. She didn't. I said stand up. She couldn't not without his help. Hutchins was strong, but dragging 145 pounds of dead weight across gravel was harder than he expected. He was sweating now, grunting with effort, his uniform disheveled. And all of it was being recorded. Every grunt. Every curse. Every violation of every protocol the Harris County Sheriff's Department had ever established. From the highway, 3 cars had pulled over. Their occupants stood on the shoulder, phones raised, recording everything. One of them, a young black man in his 20s, stepped closer. "Hey! What are you doing to her?" Hutchins spun around. "Stay back. This is police business." "That doesn't look like police business. That looks like assault." "I said stay back." Another person, a middle-aged white woman, joined the young man. "I'm calling 911, she announced loudly. "This is not okay." More cars were stopping now. More phones were appearing. Hutchins was losing control of the situation. He looked around wildly at the crowd, at Renee on the ground, at the phones recording him, and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He drew his weapon again. But this was only the beginning of the end. Because what Officer Hutchins didn't know, what no one on that highway knew, was that the FBI agents weren't the only people on their way. 3 months earlier, the Department of Justice had opened a secret investigation into civil rights violations by Harris County Sheriff's officers. The investigation had been triggered by 17 complaints against a single officer. 17 complaints from Black and Hispanic motorists. 17 stories of unjustified stops, illegal searches, verbal abuse, and weapons drawn without cause. The officer at the center of the investigation? Dean Hutchins. And the DOJ had been waiting patiently, quietly for him to do it again. Now, they had their proof. The first FBI vehicle arrived in exactly 11 minutes. A black Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows and federal plates pulled onto the shoulder behind the line of civilian cars. 4 agents emerged. They were dressed in tactical gear vests marked FBI in bright yellow letters, sidearms holstered but visible. The lead agent, a tall black man named Special Agent Marcus Webb, approached the scene with his credentials held high. "Officer Hutchins. FBI. Lower your weapon immediately." Hutchins spun toward them, gun still raised. "We have authority over civil rights violations, officer. And you're standing in the middle of one." Agent Webb didn't flinch. "I'm going to tell you one more time, lower your weapon and step away from the woman." The crowd had grown larger now. At least a dozen phones were recording. Someone was live-streaming to Facebook. Hutchins looked around. At the FBI agents. At the crowd. At Renee, still on the ground. At the cameras everywhere, cameras. For the first time in 18 years, Dean Hutchins realized he had nowhere to run. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his weapon. "Good," Agent Webb said. "Now place it on the ground and step back. This is harassment. I want my union rep. You'll get your rep after you're processed. Gun on the ground. Now." Hutchins placed his service weapon on the gravel. He stepped back. And then Agent Webb said the words that Renee Marshall would remember for the rest of her life. "Officer Dean Hutchins, you are under arrest for violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a federal court of law." The handcuffs clicked shut. And for the first time since the traffic stop began, Renee Marshall allowed herself to breathe. But here's where everything took an unexpected turn. As Agent Webb's team took Hutchins into custody, a second convoy of vehicles arrived. These weren't FBI. They were DOJ, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. And they weren't there just for Dean Hutchins. They were there to announce the culmination of a 3-month investigation that was about to tear the Harris County Sheriff's Department apart. Senior DOJ Attorney Victoria Chen stepped out of the lead vehicle. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who had spent 2 decades prosecuting civil rights cases. She approached Renee immediately. "Dr. Marshall. I'm Victoria Chen with the Department of Justice. Are you injured?" Renee shook her head slowly. Just shaken. Bruised. My arm, he grabbed it pretty hard. We'll have you examined by medical personnel. But first, I need to tell you something. Victoria glanced at the crowd, at the phones, at the scene that was now being broadcast to thousands of people in real time. What happened to you today is not an isolated incident. Officer Dean Hutchins has been the subject of a federal investigation for 3 months. We've documented a pattern of racial profiling, illegal searches, and excessive force targeting Black and Hispanic motorists. Renee closed her eyes. How many? Documented? 17 victims that we know of. But based on our review of his traffic stop records, the actual number is likely in the hundreds. Hundreds. Hundreds of people who had gone through what she'd just experienced. Hundreds of people who didn't have a husband in the FBI. Hundreds of people who couldn't fight back. Why wasn't he stopped before now? Victoria's expression tightened. Because the complaints against him were handled internally. By his department. By supervisors who either didn't care or actively covered for him. She paused. But that ends today. Officer Hutchins will face federal charges. Additionally, we are announcing a comprehensive investigation into the Harris County Sheriff's Department's handling of misconduct complaints. Several supervisory officers are expected to face charges as well. The news spread fast. Within an hour, every major network in Texas was covering the story. Within 2 hours, it had gone national. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. All of them. The footage from Renee's dashcam was everywhere: the drawn weapon, the illegal search, the verbal abuse, all of it played on loop while anchors discussed the implications. But it was the bystander footage that truly captured the nation's attention. The young Black man who had stepped forward to challenge Hutchins, his name was Donnell Jackson, 23 years old, a nursing student at the University of Houston, had captured the moment the FBI arrived from a perfect angle. His video showed Agent Webb approaching with his credentials. It showed Hutchins being disarmed. It showed the handcuffs going on. And it showed Renee Marshall still on the ground, still in her surgical scrubs, her hospital badge still visible, finally being helped to her feet by federal agents. The video went viral within hours. 20 million views by midnight. And counting. 3 weeks after the incident, Officer Dean Hutchins appeared before a federal magistrate. He was indicted on 4 counts of civil rights violations, 2 counts of assault under color of law, and 1 count of making false statements to federal investigators. The maximum sentence, 4 to 5 years in federal prison. His bail was set at $500,000. He couldn't make it. But Hutchins wasn't the only one facing consequences. The DOJ investigation had uncovered a culture of cover-ups that went all the way to the top of the Harris County Sheriff's Department. 3 supervisors were indicted for obstruction of justice. 7 other officers were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The sheriff himself, a man named Roy Thornton who had been in office for 16 years, announced his resignation, effective immediately. In light of recent revelations, he said at a hastily assembled press conference, "I believe it is in the best interest of the department and the community for me to step aside." Translation: he was abandoning ship before the ship went down. And the 17 victims? They were finally being heard. One by one, they came forward, some for the first time ever, to tell their stories. Angela Price, a 48-year-old grandmother who had been pulled over for driving too slowly and had her car torn apart looking for drugs that didn't exist. Marcus Williams, a 32-year-old IT consultant who had been handcuffed on the side of I-45 for matching a suspect description, even though he was wearing a full business suit. Loretta Thompson, a 61-year-old retired schoolteacher who had been pulled over 11 times in 3 years, every time by Dean Hutchins, and had never once received a citation. Their stories were different, but the theme was the same. Black people in nice cars, black people in white neighborhoods. Black people who, in Dean Hutchins's twisted worldview, simply didn't belong. But the story doesn't end with punishment. It ends with healing. 1 month after the arrest, Dr. Renee Marshall stood in the lobby of Houston Methodist Hospital. A crowd had gathered: doctors, nurses, administrative staff, patients who had heard she was speaking. Behind her, a banner read, "Justice, Dignity, Healing." Renee stepped to the microphone. "A month ago," she said, "I was pulled over on I-10. A police officer drew his weapon on me, searched me, humiliated me, and would have arrested me for crimes I didn't commit if not for the fact that my husband happened to be watching. The crowd was silent. I am a doctor. I have spent my career saving lives, all lives. And in that moment, on the side of that highway, none of that mattered. All that officer saw was a black woman in an expensive car. And he decided that made me guilty of something. She paused. But here's what I need you to understand. What happened to me is not remarkable. It's not special. It happens every single day to black people across this country who don't have husbands in the FBI, who don't have dashcams streaming to secure servers, who don't have the resources to fight back. Her voice grew stronger. I'm standing here today not because I'm a victim. I refuse to accept that label, but because I have a platform. And I'm going to use it. She announced the creation of the Marshall Foundation for Police Accountability, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing legal resources, documentation technology, and advocacy support for victims of police misconduct. The initial funding, $2 million from her own savings. The goal, to ensure that no one had to face what she had faced alone. Because justice, Renee said, her voice breaking just slightly, should not depend on who you're married to. It should be the birthright of every American citizen. The crowd erupted in applause. 6 months later, Dean Hutchins stood trial in federal court. The evidence was overwhelming. Dashcam footage from Renee's vehicle. Bystander footage from multiple angles. Testimony from 17 victims who had finally found the courage to speak. Body camera footage from Hutchins's own equipment, footage that had been mysteriously corrupted in previous complaints but had been recovered by FBI forensic technicians. The defense tried everything. They claimed Hutchins had been following procedure. They claimed he had reason to fear for his safety. They claimed the victims were exaggerating, misremembering, lying. The jury didn't buy any of it. After 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdict. Guilty. On all counts. At sentencing, the judge, a white-haired man named Howard Pierce who had been on the federal bench for 30 years, addressed Hutchins directly. You were entrusted with a badge and a weapon, Judge Pierce said. That trust carried with it a sacred responsibility to protect and serve all citizens equally, regardless of race, regardless of income, regardless of the car they drive or the neighborhood they live in. Hutchins stared at the table. You violated that trust repeatedly, systematically, and without remorse. You treated black motorists as criminals simply because of their skin color. You invented justifications for searches that had no basis in law. You drew your weapon on unarmed citizens who posed no threat. And when given the opportunity to recognize your wrongdoing, you doubled down even after being told that federal agents were on the way. The judge shook his head. This court has considered your years of service. Your lack of prior felony convictions. The letters from family members asking for leniency. He paused. But this court has also considered the 17 victims whose lives you disrupted. The hundreds more whose complaints were never documented. The irreparable harm you have done to the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Judge Pierce delivered the sentence. Dean Hutchins, you are hereby sentenced to 22 years in federal prison, to be served consecutively with no possibility of parole for the first 15 years. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none to spare. Hutchins was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He would be 70 years old before he was eligible for release. 1 year after the traffic stop that changed everything, Renee Marshall sat on the porch of her home in Katy, watching the sunset with her husband. James had taken a few days off, a rarity for the deputy director of the FBI, to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard. Little Zoe, now 4 years old, was chasing fireflies with her cousins. You know, James said quietly, I've been doing this job for 28 years. I've seen a lot of bad people face justice. But watching Hutchins get sentenced. He shook his head. That was different. Renee leaned into him. Because it was personal. Because it was you. He took her hand. When I saw that live stream, when I saw him pointing a gun at your head, I have never been more scared in my life. Not in combat. Not in hostage situations. Nothing. I was scared too. I know you were. And I'm sorry you had to go through that. Renee was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about the others, she said finally. The 17 victims who testified. The hundreds who never came forward. All those people who went through what I went through, maybe worse, and never got justice. But they're getting it now. The foundation you started, it's made a real difference. She nodded slowly. The Marshall Foundation had already provided legal assistance to 43 victims of police misconduct across Texas. They distributed over 500 dashcam systems to families who couldn't afford them. They trained volunteers in documentation and advocacy. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Zoe came running up to the porch, breathless with excitement. Grandma! Grandma! I caught a firefly. Look! She held up her cupped hands, a tiny light blinking between her small fingers. Renee smiled and bent down to her granddaughter's level. Beautiful, baby. What are you going to do with it? Zoe thought seriously for a moment. Then she opened her hands and watched the firefly drift away into the darkening sky. I'm letting it go, she said. So it can go be free with its family. Renee pulled Zoe into a hug and held her tight. That's exactly right, sweetheart. Everyone deserves to be free. Everyone deserves to go home to their family. Over Zoe's shoulder, Renee's eyes met James's. No words were needed. They both understood what that simple statement meant and how close they had come to losing everything. Dr. Renee Marshall's victory was more than personal. It was a beacon, a signal fire that illuminated a darkness that too many people had been forced to navigate alone for too long. Dignity doesn't pause for a traffic stop. Justice doesn't yield to a badge. And the courage of one woman, who refused to be silenced even with a gun pointed at her head, can spark a movement that changes everything. But here's what Renee wants you to remember. She fought back because she could. She had resources, connections, technology that most people don't have. The 17 victims who testified at Hutchins's trial? They didn't have those advantages. They had only their voices that had been ignored for years until someone with power finally listened. That's why Renee started her foundation. That's why she speaks at churches, community centers, and schools across Texas. That's why she refuses to let her story be the only one that matters. Because justice should not be a luxury. It should be a right. And until it is, until every black mother, every black grandmother, every black daughter can drive down any highway in America without fear, the work continues. So the next time someone tells you to just comply and everything will be fine, remember Renee Marshall. She complied. She kept her hands visible. She moved slowly. She did everything right. And she still ended up with a gun pointed at her head. Compliance is not the problem. The problem is a system that treats black skin as probable cause. And changing that system starts with each of us watching, recording, speaking up, showing up, and refusing to look away. Because the light of justice cannot shine if we allow the darkness of silence to prevail. And every voice matters. Every witness matters. Every person who refuses to accept injustice even when it's easier to keep driving matters. Renee Marshall survived that day on I-10. But she didn't just survive. She transformed her trauma into purpose. Her pain into power. Her story into a legacy that will protect countless others who come after her. And that, more than any conviction or sentence, is true justice. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever experienced something like this or witnessed it, know that you are not alone. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And together, we can build the world our children deserve.